Welcome back to the Soul Sisters EMC². This is our third podcast, and today we're going to be discussing the Anunnaki of Nibiru by Gerald Clark. And we've all been studying and reading. And last week we came at you with soulmates, so today we're going to mix it up and do kind of our book club review. And we'll also have Gerald on. I have the benefit of being married to him, so he's agreed to come on the show. So we'll have him on and ask him questions directly, and we'll give our best interpretation of his material. And some of us are brand new to this information, and I've been exposed to it a little bit longer. So you'll get a good broad perspective on what's going to come. And just for fun, if you're wondering what the EMC² is about, it's E for Erica Vetra with vetrafitness.com. It's M for Monica with fabfitover40.com, and it's C² for Christa Clark, that's me, with artisticvegan.com. So you guys have both read his book, and you're ready for the show and pumped up, and we'll be asking you questions shortly. And just to begin, I'm just going to give a brief background on the Anunnaki. It's going to be, very shortened and condensed, and it's, my interpretation of Gerald Clark's work, so it may not be exactly as he would do it, but it'll be my take on it. So back in 2013, Gerald Clark wrote the book, The Anunnaki of Nibiru, and I thought it was really courageous of him, coming from the corporate lifestyle, to put out who the God of the Old Testament was, and connecting those with the three major religions in the world. So it took a lot of guts to do this, and as a result, now he's changed numerous people's lives and continues to get emails daily. And so we thought it would be fun to share his work. He first had us on the Decoders of Truth, episode 8, and it kind of launched us. So this is our way of honoring his work. So who are the Anunnaki? Anunnaki literally means, or is often interpreted as, those who from heaven to earth came, and heaven being Nibiru, which is their home planet. And he likes the interpretation using Anu is Anunnaki. Anu is the chief deity of Nibiru, and so it could also be translated as those who from Anu to earth came. So that's another, or earth were sent. So about 450,000 years ago, we go way back in time, back on planet Nibiru, their atmosphere was failing. They were in close to the sun, and they needed to protect their atmosphere from the incoming onset of radiation. And so they needed gold in order to do that. If we fast forward through some of the tales, they went to Earth, a team of scientists. It was led by Enki, the chief scientist, who was Anu's son. And they went to the Earth, and first they started trying to get it out of the ocean, and it wasn't really going as planned. And so they ended up in the Abzu in Africa, and they ended up mining the gold, and they had GG workers, which are the watchers, known as in the Bible. And they mined the gold for 3,600 years. So 3,600 years of our Earth years, which is 1 year of the Nibirian year so their planet goes around the sun once in 3,600 of our years. So that's their orbit. And so they had been working for 3,600 years. They were tired. They didn't have any partners, any women to console them after their hard days. And they were frustrated and angry, and said, we're tired of this, we need a break. And Allah is mentioned in the Atrahasis itself, in an ancient Sumerian text. He led the revolt, and he said, well, let's go to my father's house, Enlil's house. We'll go to his fortress. So they went to the fortress, and they said, probably with fire and tools, and just really upset, saying, we need a break. And he didn't know, what's this rabble that's risen around my home? He was asleep at the time and was awoken to this, and called forth different Nibirian council members, namely Anu, Enki, Isis, and Enlil were there. And he was like, put on the tear show, like, oh, they've come, against me, and I don't know why, let's kill one. And so he wanted to kill one of them as an example and say, get back to work. Not very kind. And the other ones on the council members, I believe it was Anu, said, why are we questioning them? Their work is indeed too hard. They do need a break. And so they came to the conclusion, tools versus slaves, and they ended up making slaves, which is us. They made the human race And they did it by combining the bipedal hominid at the time that they had found with their blood, the Anunnaki blood, and this essence of the Anunnaki. So we are in part Anunnaki, which is kind of fun to learn. At first, the humanoid, or the people that they created, they couldn't procreate. Kind of Gerald explains, kind of like a donkey can't procreate, and so Thoth came in, who's also Ningshita or Hermes or Jesus, known in a lot of different cultures also as Buddha. So he came in and fixed the genetics and made it so that they could procreate. And then you fast forward, they had millions of people, flooded the earth, and animal grew tired of the sound and everything, and disease and all these other things were implemented on the workers. And soon the flood came, they agreed not to tell the workers whether it was caused naturally by Nibiru's passing, or if they caused it to rid the earth of their creation. Then it's kind of still speculated. The people survived, and that was Noah, which is the Asudra. And he was actually Enki's son, and so now the Earth's been repopulated. And if you fast forward to 1992, Zachariah Sitchin and Dr. Robert Harrington with the NASA Observatory, I believe, Dr. Robert Harrington confirmed that his IRAS-scope saw planet Nibiru, agreed with Zachariah Sitchin's finding, and agreed that Nibiru is indeed real. And since then, Paul Hellier's kind of come out and said there's other species that are on our planet. And so there's been more stuff in today's time that has confirmed the existence of them. So that kind of brings us back to where we are now. And his book doesn't just tell us about the creation of man. It tells us about the creation of Earth. It tells us about our energy bodies. It tells us about astrological signs, about frequencies, about, thoughts, harp, about how, if you have negative thoughts, then this is kind of a revelation for me. I always thought that every thought I thought was my own until I read his book and realized, well, no, not necessarily. You could have negative thoughts that are being, fed into you that aren't yours, and it's up to you, and it's your responsibility to be in charge of those thoughts. And so one practice that works for me is I'll say, okay, I know this is the truth. This is what I believe about it. This is where I stand. And if it's outside that scope and it's not in line with my higher good or my higher self, then I let that go. So his book is so much more than just the Anunnaki, I feel. And it's helped me open up my mind in my life. And I hope it kind of opened up your guys' mind to something new. Before I met Gerald, I didn't know who the Anunnaki were. And I don't know that I would have found them without him. And so it all kind of comes together really magically. And to bring you guys in, Erica, I wanted to ask how much fun you had in chapter 3, learning, since you are really astrology, learning about how the earth kind of came into creation, and then also about the additional sign of Ophiuchus and how that created different signs. And it put us in a different zodiac. Like I was a Pisces, but now technically according to that, I'm an Aquarius. So that's kind of a head trip if you really associate to your sign, which I know you do. So if you want to share your thoughts on that and any other thoughts.
Sure. Wow. There's so much I want to say. First of all, I just have to say I had a really fun time reading the whole book. And I think, like you said, it's not just about Anunnaki. I almost want to say like each chapter could be expanded into its own book, because it was like really mind-blowing, which is why it took me a while to read it, because after every chapter you're like, whoa, okay, hold on. So like you, I mean, I haven't been around this knowledge for very long. I only found the Anunnaki through Zachariah, and then that's how I found you guys. So it's been, not a very long time. So I consider myself pretty new in this field, but I'm still in the like, oh my God phase, where everything I learned is just like, wow. So yeah, chapter 3 in the book is about evidence of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. And I think Gerald divides it into astrological evidence and other things. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the astrological side, going back to the creation of the Earth. And this, again, I'm probably going to say this a lot during this show, but this information was really new to me and really surprising. And I was fortunate enough not to be brought up in a household that enforced like really strong beliefs one way or the other. So I'm lucky to have been able to come into it with a pretty open mind. But anyway, so the Earth, I guess from what I understand, the 12th planet Nibiru was, long time ago got accidentally trapped in the solar system's orbit, or and messed with a whole bunch of gravitational fields around different planets. And I'm skimming over details because I don't want to just recite stuff. But what happened was Nibiru struck another planet known as Tiamat. And Tiamat was a huge planet. And when that happened, Tiamat split apart. And then a large chunk of it eventually sort of like congealed into what we call Earth, or what became Earth. And then the remaining debris ended up, I think, as asteroids, I think. And so what happened was the fact that Nibiru collided with Tiamat and then those two things became Earth means, I think we assume, right, that like the genetic and geological and, stuff from that planet, from Nibiru, the Anunnaki home, fused with what is now Earth. So again, when Enki and Enlil and Anu came to Earth for the first time, they made a species, but there were already things here, right? So it's like we're this weird mix of some kind of native species to the ex-Tiamat, now Earth planet, and stuff that was engineered by the Anunnaki. So one thing that I thought was really interesting to me, I guess from an astrological standpoint, is that the way that the Earth was created by, this whole Tiamat being struck by a satellite of Nibiru, our moon came from Nibiru too. So I guess it was a satellite of Nibiru that got trapped in the Earth's orbit and became what they referred to as Kingu, which is our moon. And our moon, it's been, I think, observed throughout history that Earth's moon is like way bigger than other moons of other planets. And this, I think, is why, or could be why, I think it's safe to assume. Yeah. So just, thinking about like on a day-to-day basis, whether or not you're into astrology, the moon, everyone talks about the moon and like the crazy influence that the moon has, at different times of its cycle, of the month, or the month, of a moon cycle. So I think that just the whole way that our planet kind of came into creation, and the fact that we have this foreign thing as our moon has really set the stage in a way for like a lot of astrological like methodology and techniques and interpretations of behavior. So that's one thing I noticed that was really interesting about chapter 3.
Yeah.
And then of course the adding of the 13th sign Ophiuchus, which is I believe falls, if we add it into the zodiac, it changes all the dates of the other signs. And one of the interesting things is that they don't, the dates change and the durations of the signs change. So like Sagittarius, so Ophiuchus is between Scorpio and Sagittarius. That makes Scorpio like 6 days long or something like that. And then Sagittarius is like a month and a half, which is really interesting. And I'm a Gemini in the 12 zodiac system, but I guess I would be bumped down or back to Taurus in the new system. From what I was reading about sort of the traits or the qualities of Ophiuchans, it's an interesting mix that I think maybe we don't necessarily see in other sun signs. It's like the sort of like rebellious, like it's almost like a vigilante type sign, really going against authority, but for a just cause, and very headstrong. There's some Sagittarius in there, I think, just in terms of like the warrior and the like fighter, but it's a little bit more rough around the edges.
Yeah. And then if you like look at like Anonymous or all these people that are doing that and rising up against injustices in today's world, you could see how maybe that it is influencing us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So Monica, I noticed that you on Facebook that you recently just went to the Ark in Kentucky, and the pictures looked really amazing. It was huge. What a production to build that. And I was just kind of curious, having just been there and then having just read Gerald's book and reading about, these different players and how Noah was also known as another name back in Sumer as the Asudra, or as the Atrahasis, excuse me. And so I was just wondering what your feelings and thoughts were on that.
Good question. And okay, so to just give everyone a little bit of an idea about my experience with an Anunnaki, I know zero. Completely zero. So I'm reading this book and I'm going through it, and it's like a process. It's going through my head, and I'm going, okay, well, and right now it's a struggle for me to remember names and who did what and what did what and all these different things. So forgive me when I go through this if I'm not completely, absolutely clear, but based on what little I do know, and I can give you my own experiences. And you know what? I honestly didn't know before I read this that Noah even there was another name for Noah. And it's weird because what I've noticed is like all throughout history, there's like a play on semantics. Everybody means the same thing, but because we call it a different word, we start getting up and, oh, no, and this is what it is, and this is what it is, and no, you're wrong, and this is what it is. And to be honest with you too, even before I went to the Ark, I had no clue really what it was. I just knew that it was a reconstruction of Noah's Ark. And even I noticed like some people that posted on my post, they were like, oh, I don't know if I want to go there because I don't want to be bombarded with like, people trying to preach to me or whatever it was. And I had a little bit of that too, because I wasn't sure, because I was in that environment for so long of Christianity, Catholicism. Everyone's attempting to force their views on you. Mm-hmm. And when we went there, it was actually very refreshing because nothing was forced on anyone. There was simply informative sections that you could go through at your own leisure. You could sit, you could read. And so it was, I mean, if you look at how enormous the boat is, and you see but what's really interesting too is like, I was going through and asking questions, and then Jay was like, well, they're trained on how to respond to you because they probably want to just tell you what they want you to know. And I get that throughout life. There's information that's voluntarily given to people, and then there's information that people want to hold back. Sure. So sometimes in life, like even going there, I'm like wondering like, well, what's real and what's not? Mm-hmm. And how do we know if it's real? And the only thing that I can for myself gauge it as is like, truth feels light, and lies and fear is really heavy, and it's just like, it's like this consuming of the mind. It doesn't feel good. Mm-hmm. And so that's the only thing that I could go to. So as I was walking through there and I was seeing different things, and even comparing, even like in the book, like what I thought was interesting too was, so how do you say it? Atrahasis?
Atrahasis.
Okay. Told you I didn't know. Atrahasis. So he's told to build a boat. And I thought it was, the story is similar in some ways. It's very, very similar. So I find it interesting how so many people attempt to prove their point on who's right and who's wrong, when the story is pretty much, I mean, the essence of it's all the same. Mm-hmm. It's all the same. The boat was there. And then, so what I was wondering too, do you guys mind if I ask questions too?
No, not at all.
Okay, cool. So what I was wondering, because in here it says that it was right here, when the third year arrived, the people's looks were changed by starvation. So is the year like our year, or is that year different? Because if in 3 years their looks change because of starvation, wouldn't they be dead?
That was a great time to bring Gerald on. Definitely more versed in this knowledge. And so Gerald, would you like to come on our show?
How's everybody?
Hey!
Good.
Great.
So you're gonna question me now, huh?
I just don't, I'm not clear, and I don't understand. Like, so Jay was telling me a little bit because I was asking him on the plane.
Oh.
But I thought
you guys are talking about Atrahasis, huh?
Yeah, Atrahasis. And it says right here, the Atrahasis tablet, in it says, they had depleted the storehouse. When the third year arrived, the people's looks were changed by starvation. So I was curious, like back then, did they not need food as much as we needed food, or like?
No, they did. So basically it was a series of onslaughts, if you will, that spanned a 6-year period, not 3 years. So he started out by introducing 2 diseases that were supposed to cull the population. And that was Sarupu and Asaku disease. Okay, and each one had a different terrible effect. Mm-hmm. And then simultaneously, right after that, and each time, Atrahasis is going to his father, his God, and asking him to run intercession, right, against what's happening to these people.
Right.
So it's very, very interesting. So about the third event was cutting off the food and then the water. Mm-hmm. And actually, they cut off the water first in order to prevent the crops from growing. They talk about the alkalinity of the field showing up.
Right.
And then so about the time they got to the 6th year, from what was said in the documents, they had turned to cannibalism. They were selling each other into slavery as food. Very, very disgusting. So, and there was hardly any of them left by the 6th year. And that's when finally Enlil asked Enki to bring a flood to wipe the rest of them out.
Right.
That's the part of the Noah's flood story that everybody remembers, but they don't remember, or they'll have no knowledge of the genocidal acts that took place before that.
Right. Only that essentially what was told is that, like they say, God was not happy with his people. And so that's the reason. And then Noah was the chosen one, and he was chosen with his family to pick 2 of each kind, male and female, to go onto the boat. That's the story that I remember of Noah's.
Yeah, right. Well, that's the Genesis account.
Yeah.
In the Atrahasis account, clearly Enki was the one that saved his son, and the one that was trying to destroy him is the one that portrayed himself as God. So you read in the Genesis account where he says their thoughts were evil all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Even while they were mining his gold, right? And then you realize that it's Enlil who brought all the destruction, and then played God, saying, well, they were guilty for doing what they did, and they were sinning, and I wiped them out. Well, that's not true at all. They swore an oath not to tell them about a naturally occurring disaster, along with all the other things he did to them before that, to make sure that when they did come, they were all gone.
Right.
So.
Right.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. But, I find it fascinating. I really find it fascinating how it's, like I said, the essence and the truth is there. And yet it seems like there's other like fillers that are put in there, maybe as a distraction. I'm not
sure. Yeah. Well, the key points that really got me was when you went back to the exact city that Noah is mentioned in the Bible in Genesis as Shuruppak. You realize that's mentioned is he's the king there. And then you go to the Atrahasis account, and what city are we in? Shuruppak. Yeah. 600 years after he was the king, it's exactly the 600 years that shows up in Genesis. Listen, we don't even have any whims whatsoever that the texts that were taken on all the Hebrew documents were derived from the Sumerian documents. So the idea that the story is the same, well, obviously it'd be the same. It was derived from it. And even Mauro Bolino, when I interviewed him, said even at the highest level of the Vatican, they all know this. So you may be surprised by saying, wow, the Sumerian document looks kind of similar to the Genesis. No, it's the other way around, actually.
Right. So then what's your, and I know I'm veering off a little bit, but I'm just curious too, because I get to ask the Gerald Clark questions about this. Jay always looks at me like, because, honestly, like before when Jane would speak about this stuff, like I guess you could say resistant to it all because I was raised differently. And I'm thinking, I have no clue what you're talking about. Like this, like to me, it seemed like E.T. or aliens coming from the sky. And I'm thinking like, people are going to think I'm freaking crazy if I believe in this stuff. And I really don't care to learn about it because I'd rather go with what feels good.
What a crazy perspective you have. All of a sudden, didn't you guys just go back to Kentucky?
Yeah.
See the big Noah's Ark? Well, now you're seeing the story that predated the Bible verse.
Right.
Okay, but there weren't. Yeah, he took his local farm animals on board, but guess what? They took genetic samples that they've been taking for thousands of years all over the earth in a seed vault with a geneticist and a navigator. Okay, so it's a little more complicated story than what we were told in Genesis.
Right. Right. And what's interesting too, especially about the Ark, was so the Ark. When you go there, it obviously has stories about Jesus. It has other stories with Noah and his wife and the family and what they did when they were on the boat. But then what's interesting too is it also gives you different perspectives. Like it says, well, this is this perspective. Some people think that there's extraterrestrial. Some people they have these different perspectives. And I thought that's pretty cool. At least they're not saying like, they're not saying like they're some of them, they said, well, how can that be when the loving God that we have, blah, blah, blah. So there's different ways that they're attempting to steer people. So yes. However, there are some things that they're giving, like if somebody went there and they didn't really necessarily think about that, they would look at that and go, oh, I never even thought about that. So already it puts that in the mind a little bit of some of the people that aren't aware. And so that part of it I thought was pretty cool because it's not like they're just like, you must believe. You're, like when I was growing up, or even in Christianity, you're going to go to hell if you don't do this, that, or the other, And so,
you find it curious that two things that they put it in the Bible Belt, where there are mega churches and the belief system in the Bible being the exact word of God is very, very strong. I grew up there, I know. And secondly, why introduce it now? Okay,
Right.
We've always had the ability to build very complex vessels and stuff that we could have done this. Why now?
Right. And I was asking the worker that worked there, I said, so I'm curious, like what was this built? And she said that, I forget the guy's name, Sam something or other. He spent $100 million to build this.
Wow.
And according to the woman who worked there that I was asking questions to, she says it cannot float because of all the concrete and everything else. But she says it's a for-profit type of museum, whereas a creation museum is a nonprofit one. But it's just like $100 million to build this thing that is basically just a huge museum. Crazy.
No.
That's crazy.
I actually started looking into the source of his money and his affiliations, and I got sidetracked. But I think somebody's going to bring that out eventually. Is he part of a secret society? What is his intent? Is it somehow affiliated with Georgia Guidestones in some way? Who knows?
Yeah, and that's where Jay was like, well, they're going to tell you what they want you to know. They're not going to, they're trained on how to respond to people. And yeah, I get that. I was just curious to see what their response was. But what is really cool there too is that they have like Bibles from like the 1600s. They have all these artifacts from way back when, and I have no idea how they got them. Maybe that's part of the 100 million that they have invested in it. It's definitely beautiful. And they have it like way out in the boonies that, you see these beautiful, gorgeous sunsets. It's awesome. So, but comparing it with what you had in here, it definitely is, to me, like it opened a different part of my brain, I guess you can say, because like the way I've always thought about it is like our neurons are always connected. You have certain information, and then as you start to expand and think, like they connect in different ways, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, well, that's a trip. So that's what I felt like. I felt like I was opening up my brain in different ways. And like before, I was more resistant to even knowing the information. And I thought that, people that I knew or, anybody, they're going to judge me. They're going to think weird of me. And so as I'm reading this, it's basically, this is all data. This is all data. This is not opinion.
No.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Sumerian tablets that you can go to the museum and see today. So when that hits home, usually for people, especially after reading the Atrahasis, and I think Christa will attest to this, that particular sequence of 11 tablets has such an impact for us primitive workers. If we put our eyes on it and read all of them ourselves, because all of a sudden we're going to realize that, well, this was written by Enki's son who got saved, and he's telling us for our benefit, especially these secret oaths and the things that were done to us. He's telling you who the players are and who did what to whom and where we stand as a species. Very powerful.
And a really good detail too. Right. Erica, did you have any questions for Gerald or anything you had?
Any questions? Yeah, I got a million.
You really liked the Enuma Elish part of the creation story, didn't you, for some reason?
Yeah, I really liked the Enuma. Well, okay, so I have not read the complete Enuma Elish, but I've read a little bit just kind of about it, and your summary of it in chapter 3. I thought it was amazing. And I think just going back to what we were just talking about with corroborating evidence, I think like all of the questions, not all the questions, but this pretty much goes from like opinion to fact when you look at Zachariah Sitchin's interview with Harrington. All those texts.
That was such a powerful interview. I don't even understand why it was allowed to be done. And let me just a review. So I've done several reports on the data that Dr. Harrington leaked, one of which was one source was verbally, where he told you, and that got put into a newspaper, he told you that when they first found Nibiru in 1981, when it hit all the newspapers with the IRAS scope, he told you then that he believed it was 5 billion miles outside of Pluto. That means it was 8.67 billion miles from our sun. Pluto is 3.67 billion from our sun. So it's just right outside Pluto, not a massive distance away.
Right.
Simultaneously, the scientist he was working with, Dr. Neugebauer, who was at JPL, he was on the West Coast while Harrington worked in the Naval Observatory Center for the Navy in Washington, D.C. Okay, so the United States Naval Observatory was where he was the chief scientist of. Well, this Neugebauer guy says, no, it's not 5 billion miles outside of Pluto. It's 50 billion miles away from our sun, and it's stationary. Well, that to be the location of what's called our binary twin, which is referred to by Carlos Ferrata as Herculobus. Well, this is what Nibiru orbits near in its pathway between that binary twin, which doesn't look like it's illuminated. It looks like it's a dark sun or a brown or red dwarf, okay?
Yeah.
So in 1981, we had this point where Harrington told us how far away it was. And clearly he was watching it very closely because they dispatched the Pioneers, 10 and 11, and Voyager 1 and 2 to go out and actually look at all the different places to try to verify this thing was really there. And at that time, he fast forwarding to 1990, and this is December of 1990, Sitchin and Harrington actually met each other at the United States Naval Observatory, and it was filmed. And
I watched that interview.
Yeah, I have that on my website. I can't even believe it's still been left out. It's an amazing synchronicity. So Harrington had read the Enuma Elish, knew about this invader planet, knew there was something out there tilting Neptune and Uranus, and had been for a very long time. And they could measure the deviation and kind of pointing the direction where the thing was that was causing it, okay? So they knew where it was. So in 1990, when Sitchin and Harrington got together, and then Harrington showed his diagram along with Zechariah Sitchin's diagram, they compared them and goes, yep, that's the same path.
We're talking about the same thing.
A 3,600-year retrograde orbit. And the only thing they disagreed about was where they thought it was going to pass through the zodiacal houses as it came into close perihelion with the sun.
Right.
So originally, and Harrington explained to Sitchin that, well, the reason yours is a little bit off is because you didn't take into account precession from the biblical times to right now, which was about 2,000 years. So you put one zodiacal house forward, and you ended up in looking to the southern hemisphere where Dr. Harrington actually went to Blackbirch, New Zealand to verify that in 1991. That's when he died. So he had done a couple of points, and he gave us that data. So we started out at about 8.67 billion miles from the sun in 1981, and then we ended up in 1990 when he showed us that diagram. It was only 6.6 billion miles from the sun. So the thing was not only moving, it was moving closer to perihelion, just like he said. And now we had a new blink test that I did on a 7-planet broadcast show to show you if it's moving that fast, where can we expect to see it? And it turned out we're very, very close right now, mathematically.
So I have a question.
Okay.
Because teacher, Mr. Clark, I have a question for you, Mr. Clark, or Dr. Clark. I think we should call you Professor Clark, or the highest. What's that?
I like Professor Clark.
I respond to anything as long as I get fed and a little bit of money and some free time.
Professor Clark. So the question that I have is, because it's interesting how you put in here like consciousness suppression, and how, like, sugar and all these other things can affect us, and then also too how you explain the chakras and how that works, and how they had this this way of like controlling our minds, or actually tapping into our minds, because that's how they wanted to see if we were going to revolt against them. So knowing that information, like, what do you think, especially living in our society right now? And I ask this only to give like a quick synopsis to people that are watching this. Like, what can we do while living in this physical body here now that can help us to the greatest degree to be a light, to allow ourselves to be the better versions of ourselves while not tapping into any of the darkness and
right. That's a very deep question. How do you take your meat modem through a very dirty frequency spectrum that's hitting you from all different frequencies? Okay, everything from microwave to gamma, sugar, all electric. So now, we've been designed to operate at a certain spectrum in that, and it turns out that that's coincident with the wavelengths and frequencies that are shown up in our chakras, and we know what those are. Okay, we've measured them. You can take a color and convert it to a frequency just by dividing by the speed of light. The speed of light equals wavelength times frequency, and wavelength is color. Okay, so if we want to know what frequency it is, we divide the wavelength that we got into the speed of light, and we got the frequency. Okay, so now you can go, is anybody out there transmitting at this frequency? Because they are. It might be messing with my chakras or any organs in your brain that are sensitive to spectra. So I talked about entrainment as being one of the sneaky ways that if you were to design a species of primitive worker to replace these GG miners, one of the primary things you would design into them is some aspect to control them so they wouldn't rise up and do what the last ones did, right? That was the problem you had with the last one. So that's where I introduced these hypotheses about how they might have used the electromagnetic spectrum to control us and create us in the first place. So when we start looking deeply at our electrical bodies, that becomes clear that we're highly susceptible to frequency and energy that we may not be aware of. So what can we do?
Yeah.
In general, I think what I've found pragmatically, and there may be other ways, without living in a cage made to block frequency, okay, is you got to own your own energy. Okay, that means if you're in control of all your chakras, you're not going to have some external energy that can parasitically sit there and marionette you like a puppet from a higher place that you're not in control of. Okay, so what you don't know that you don't know is what usually has you by the back of the neck. Because if you knew about it, you'd do something about it, right? So that's number one. The second thing you can do is activate your own Ba energy so that your energy is not being so much of a receiver as it is a transmitter, where you're in that process of lighting up your own energy, it protects you from external energies being stronger than yours. Because ultimately, an outside signal has to be stronger than the one you're generating to override you, okay? So doing the Merkaba meditation, do it 2 weeks in a row if you need to. But when you
every day, you mean?
Every day until you feel like that Ba energy is lit up, and you'll know what it is because you'll be seeking truth and truth only once your higher chakra comes on. And that Ba energy is kind of coincident with our understanding of the Kundalini energy.
You feel it.
It's very, very, very powerful. Okay, so when that happens, then just start noticing. Okay, I'm at this chakra, and I want to get to this one. I can tell sometimes, or I'm stuck in my throat, or my emotions are all messed up in my heart. You can usually tell where you are in your chakra. There's software out there that you can go and have it imaged too, if you're brave enough. I mentioned 2 of them in the book: resonant field imaging, which I had, and the other one is called polychromatic interference photography, that uses light to see where your energy body is, I don't know, maybe slightly askew from your proper antenna. So if your antenna's not aligned, your energy's not going to be aligned. Okay.
Well, for like most of us that are more basic, because we're, most, and I guess you can equate it to like, people with diet and fitness and all these other things. Like most people will only do the basics to get them basic results, right? So if we were to give like something basic on what they can do, so one would be like the meditation, the meditation to do that. Would another one be like as far as sugar intake, like limiting sugar intake? Because one thing that I noticed.
I want to say something in general. So, and I mentioned this the other day on a blog or something. I can't remember where it was, but I found myself saying, and I like to generalize as an engineer.
Right.
If you had absolutely zero sophistication in culture, training whatsoever, imagine you're an indigenous person living on an island and you've never been exposed to any outside learning whatsoever. Okay, and the only thing you told them was, you can do anything you want, but pay attention to how you feel. If it makes you feel bad, don't do it. If it makes you feel good, do that, and keep doing that. Just cut away all the things that make you feel bad and see where you land. Well, this has been going on in indigenous religions and cultures for a long time, okay? Living in harmony with nature, that kind of thing.
Right.
Well, if you do that for yourself, all of a sudden you'll start to realize that energy feeling that is animating your meat host is the thing you want to optimize, okay? Make it better, and it changes everything, okay? Including your consciousness. So as you pursue that, make that your life's work, because that's really what it is. It's honoring your temple and filling it with light. That's really what you're doing, right?
Right. Yeah, because when we were out of town, and I noticed something, it's interesting because maybe it's as I get older, maybe it's as I mature, whatever it is, I notice I become more of an observer of my environment and what's going on and who's around and what's entering my field and all these different. And so when we're at places, like we went to a bar before we went to the game, and you see people like they're just in the alcohol, crappy food. Like this is their existence. Their existence is to go party it up before the game, act like a fool, go home and pass out, and wake up with a hangover and then re-exist the next day.
And be proud of how hungover they are.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, well, then a couple of days later, then you swear you'll never do that, and a couple of days later you get back to feeling normal, and you somehow, some way, because of the social mores, you're willing to go back and pollute yourself over and over again, knowing how it makes you feel. Now go back to this indigenous person on the island. They don't have these complex societal pressures. All they know is, it makes me feel better, I'm doing that. It makes me feel worse, I'm not doing that. So imagine a shaman going out, gathering plants and trying to find things that are beneficial for their tribe, right? And they taste it, they sample themselves, they use themselves as the guinea pig to find out what's good and what's bad. Well, all of a sudden, they're the ones in a position to go, oh no, guys, don't try that, it'll kill you, really. Do this, okay? So they're in the kind of same position where they're getting this advice to pursue what makes you feel better. And you don't know what that height is until you do all those things, like relating your structure to gravity, changing your diet, doing exercise, optimizing like you and Jay do with your life and your Fab Fit Over 40. Okay, now extend that to your energy body and generalize that anything that you do that makes it go weaker, don't do that. If the alcohol's making you stupid, inebriated, your inhibitions are annihilated, and it's ruining your life, well, stop doing that for a while and see if you can't get better.
That's why we don't drink, because for us, we want to experience ourselves fully. We want to.
That's why you guys are meditating. You're reading all these documents that are spitting truth. You keep doing that, and you're going to end up at the highest possible place you can land as a human, and that's by design. We're all designed that way to find that place, I think. Erica, you're smiling. What do you think?
I agree. No, I keep wanting to jump in and say that. I think just, Monica, going back to your original question about what can people do kind of on a day-to-day basis to start to implement some of this higher energy or tune into to more light and less dark, I guess, to be general about it. Gerald, chapter 6, I think everyone should read. There's a lot of equations in chapter 6, but I really liked the idea, and because it talks about the chakras and the pineal gland, and I think that I would love to see people who, whether or not they are buying into whatever they buy into, I think that a basic knowledge of the chakras and sort of a demystification of what that is, because I can tell you, I talk to people every day about yoga and stuff like that, and so many people have this weird sort of like.
Yeah, well, can I respond to that? Because it became very real to me in structural integration.
Exactly. Yeah. Well,
I want you to expand on structural integration as well.
Yeah. So the model of the human we used in structural integration was A, it's malleable plastic. B, it's completely random at birth, and everything is not it's a symmetrical form, so that you can be aligned in the gravity field. And the key was getting a free and mobile pelvis. If you could get a free and mobile pelvis, and it was horizontal, you could get everything atop it to stack up, and you had a potential to experience planar symmetry, both along your mid-sagittal plane, right down the center of your body, and the transverse plane that cuts you this way, so that you're symmetrical left and right and up and down. Okay, and that's only possible from my experience in getting structure work, which treats the fascial body as malleable plastic, changes it over a period of time in a sequence so that you can adapt without being in too much trauma. Because when you change the human body and it starts adapting to the gravity field and how it should be, that transition itself takes a huge amount of responsibility to sign up for all the damage you've done to yourself, and as it comes out, dealing with it and not losing focus of where you're going. So it's an intense transition to go from a random body to one that can feel gravity at the top of your head through a combination of yoga and Tai Chi and structure work. It's very, very possible. And for me, yoga, martial arts, and I became a structural integrator, so I was getting a lot of work and giving a lot of work, and stayed in that space for about 10 years. So the idea of the relationship between your inner energy and these nerve ganglia, let's talk about those. In structure work, we have two primary ganglia that we reference from an electrical standpoint in a human. At the bottom of your tailbone is the most negative pole, which is a ground symbol in electricity, okay? Okay. And the most positive pole, like a battery, would be up behind your sphenopalatine ganglia. A ganglia is a nerve complex, okay? And we're talking about essentially 7 of them. So you got a positive and a negative one, so that when a human is up in the gravity field, where they're really like an antenna in the gravity field, those positive negative poles get amplified, just like you would with a lightning rod, okay? Because a lightning rod, the bottom that's in the ground is at the most negative polarity, okay? The ground polarity, just like your tailbone. Whereas your head being up higher in the gravity field, and electrically, because of how ions go and travel through water and other conductive things like metals, well, you're mostly water, so you conduct too. So your most positive pole is up what we call the sphenopalatine ganglia. It's right here. And it's very interesting that it's so coincident with the Ida and the Pingala nadis, which have to do with the electrical pathways up along your central conductor that intersect with the nasal concha in your nose right near that ganglia, okay? So as you're breathing, it has a huge impact on your electrical body. That's why the video I posted on the DOT group that day about the frequency for that sphenopalatine ganglia, or this concha up in here, which is very close to your pituitary gland in your third eye, okay? So following the shock waves forward, we can equate them with nerve ganglias and with components of the endocrine system that are very important. And these glands do very specific things, like the pineal gland at the crown chakra, the pituitary gland at the third eye, the thymus gland in the throat chakra, and on and on and on. So all along the endocrine system, you have glands that coincide with these nerve complexes that are operating at different frequencies or wavelengths of light. And that, to me, is amazing. So I used to have this little handheld meter. It was called a resonant field imaging meter. And if I'm taking you too much down the scientific path, you girls stop me, okay? But I would take the meter when I first learned about measuring the human energy body, and I'd start out within about 3 inches of the body. I'd take 3 measurements at each point where this nerve ganglia is, write the number down. It was a frequency. It would simply scale that. You can convert it to a wavelength and then plug it in this software, and it would show you your chakra colors and your wavelengths right up and down. Real simple, right? But it was very data intensive, having to go take 3 measurements at each point, average, blah, blah, blah. That's when I discovered polychromatic interference photography, that was looking at how photons in a full spectrum light situation refract and are bent by the biofield, the electromagnetic field that your body is creating along your central conductor because of those nerve ganglia and those electrical signals that are happening at your chakras, okay? So we were able to see it with that method as well. So it became very, very real to me. It wasn't just some foo-foo-y concept from India about, energy that nobody could see. I have images of this, and I've been measuring it for years with clients.
And I think that's important for people to realize, and it's, and without them feeling like they have to read, like have a really, detailed scientific background. Just if they know that the chakras are a thing, and I mean, no, you can't take an X-ray and see them, per se, but there are several visual systems out there that allow you to can see them now. Yes. Yeah. No. Exactly. And just to know that they're not something that you choose to believe in or not, kind of thing. Like, they exist. They're a real thing. And if you just think about how, just for the most part, how good people feel after stretching and standing up straight, and whether it's practicing yoga or doing some other sort of like postural,
consider what you're doing when you're doing yoga. You're playing with the connective tissue, adding ground substance into it, which makes it more electrical and more malleable, more pliable.
Right.
When you stretch the vertebra apart, the synovial fluid is able to go back into the little sac so that the vertebrae are lubricated and it starts moving more like a serpentine structure, like it's supposed to. Most people are so bound up in their structure, they have no idea how bad they really are.
Mm-hmm. And I talk a lot about in classes, it's just, and I feel like I sound like a broken record in class a lot, but I talk about you need to feel the downward pull as much as the upward pull. Like your analogy of the guitar string, when it's lined up, when it's all in tune, when everything's stacked, or like, how your vertebrae stack like dominoes, and you literally breathe length into your spine. Like
speaking of that, the key to the spine always for Ida Rolf was get length, because that's how you get patients out. You can't get vertebrae to unrotate if it's still all jammed down. Okay, you got to get it long. And that's true all over the body. So that really tempered my experience in the gym, because I was a hardcore gym rat. And I liked getting big in the gym, and I was kind of addicted to it. I was a master fitness trainer, and I'd been doing this since I was 17, working very hard in the gym. And I weighed 212 pounds back then, and I had about 5% body fat. And I was I was the archetype of a guy. That's what I thought you were supposed to be like, and I loved it. Well, I had no idea how badly those constricted muscles were holding my structure in its broken state.
Right.
It had been that way since I was a child. So that was really hard for me to stop shortening my muscles and try to get long. And then when I felt like I was more related to gravity, then I could tone up and do things with weights without shortening and do it such that your rubber bands and popsicle sticks aren't getting pulled
in the plane,
to such that you can't be on your line. And that's the key for us, is you gotta maintain your relationship with your line, which is your relationship to gravity, which is an infinite force. It's the strongest force you encounter every day that most people just ignore.
Right, and how Ida Rolf says that if your gravity, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but it's either your best friend or your worst enemy. Like if you're not aligned, then it's just going to kill you.
There's no in between. You either make and subjugate yourself to a relationship with gravity, or it will destroy your structure.
Yeah.
Right.
Look at a person that's over 67 years old and see if you see what the effects of gravity can be on a malleable meat host like us if we're not paying attention and playing the gravity game.
Right. So is your recommendation for structural integration, is that like yoga? Like what's your, if you could give your top 3 recommendations?
The top for me is, if you were to get structure work and be doing some sort of organized stretching method, I don't care if it's active release therapy, Heller work, Feldenkrais, structural integration, Rolfing, they're all designed to deal with the soft tissue and get it malleable enough where the bones align themselves to the gravity field. Okay, that will happen. Okay, because your body knows how to dissipate your weight through its structure when it has a proper relationship with gravity. Okay, that's when you're standing like a broom pole in the gravity field. And it's very easy to balance a broom pole around your finger when it's perfectly up and down. You see a seal do it, anybody can do it. You can do it on your nose or on your chin. But as soon as it starts falling over and you have to put in inputs like this, now there's a lot of gravitational influence you're trying to overcome. Okay, so just think about it from an efficiency standpoint. If you're always on your line doing whatever you're doing, you're dissipating gravity and you're coincident with it, and you're not fighting it. Okay, and it'll actually add to your energy body. This is the bizarre part. If you look at that equation 5A that I did, if you minimize the effect of gravity on you, you optimize your maximal human energy.
And the potential is,
and that's what we want. So it pays to sit up straight and find your line in the gravity field. It's the most important thing ever. When you look at that, it's one of the things you can control besides your weight.
So from my like 8th grade interpretation of what you're saying, like I would say that like when you do things like with intention, you do things intentionally. You don't just exist to simply exist. You're doing things to keep your full body in line and expanding from that, so that you can properly like you say, like the structural integration and your light and your chakras can all be aligned. Right?
Okay, well, imagine I'm very unsophisticated. I don't understand anything that any of us just said, and I'm back on that New Guinea island as an indigenous person, and I do an experiment. I was told, whatever you do, think, see, put in your mouth, if it makes you feel better, do it. And if I'm sitting like this, and I get a kink in my neck, and I go, well, that's better. I'm not doing that anymore. Boom, it's over. You see what I'm saying? Just keep doing the things that take your antenna higher in your perception of energy, and cut out the things that are debilitating you. If you're sitting on cushions and your pelvis is tucking forward and you're getting a sore back, figure it out. Your pelvis is on a hard surface with 2 sacral ischial tuberosity bones pushed down, symmetrical in pressure, that causes you to sit up. If you're sitting on a cushion, you can't feel that. So take responsibility for that. Okay.
Well, and that's a great point, and I think that's something that is difficult for people sometimes for people to really be honest with themselves about.
It's radical. They don't want to hear you. What do you mean don't sit on a cushion? That's radical. You guys are crazy.
Yeah, like and especially in this culture, it's like the fast fix, instant gratification. Like, I just want to be comfortable. I've had a long day at work.
Let's extend it to sleeping at night. Now you're out of the gravity field, right, at night?
Yeah.
Now look what we do. We lay on these huge mattresses that are all cushiony so that we can't feel anything. None of our pressure points. Why? Because it's comfortable. Well, guess what that does? It reinforces the pattern of deviation that's in your body.
Right, exactly.
We used to sleep on mats on the floor, and they do all over the world still. And what does that do while this connective tissue is coming in contact with the ground? You're laying there unconscious and go, oh, my shoulder blade hurts right there, and you roll around. That process of pressure, there's pressure, tension, temperature, and frequency change fascia. Well, it used to be when we laid on the floor on the mat and had a relationship a symmetrical relationship between this shoulder blade and that one. If you laid on the ground and hurt, guess what? After you fell asleep after a while, they'd be getting therapy and they'd be evening them out. That never happens on a cushion. Okay, I want you to know that.
Pain is great feedback. I mean, it's a good teacher. It's one of the best teachers. And I mean, if you look at just the history of like American, like professional sports, I mean, people used to play professional basketball in like, you know, flat little Converse and Adidas shoes, and there was a much lower rate of knee and ankle injuries as opposed to when they started coming out with these like super cushioned arch support shoes. People would just bang the crap out of their joints because they have a cushion. It's like sleeping on a mattress, so they don't feel
the whole idea of how the body works, you know, structurally. Right. It needs to be put in a manual. Actually, all of the stuff we talk about needs to be put in a new manual for a way to live on this seventh planet and not
do that.
If you want to find a way out, here's the optimal way. If you want to just get along, go for that.
Yeah.
Honestly, you should do something like that, Gerald, where you put in like it's almost like it's like a structural integration for dummies. You know, like a quick way to look at it and just go, wow, I could do that. Like, you know, whether it's the mattress.
Well, let's talk about that. I think we need a workbook of here's some basic things that people can do without going, you know, 582 pages to figure it out.
Exactly.
No, somebody brought this up the other day, and I think it's a very good idea. So I think we ought to shelve that and make that an issue that we talk about sometime.
Right. No, absolutely. I think that's 100% yes, because there's so many of us, like, honestly, like, it's like even when Jay has this podcast or when he has this, when he speaks, and I'm like, you know, it's all great information, but like, for me, I'm very basic, and he always laughs because, you know, I'm from the, what does he say? I'm like, my whole background is like field worker. And so like my mind processing things, I have to have it broken down so simple, because as soon as he starts using these big words and putting them all together, my mind just goes, phew.
Are you very visual? Do you like visual things?
I like visual things, and I like to be able to like,
yeah, make him do flow diagrams and put it in pictures and
he'll
tables.
draw things out for me if I'm like.
It really helps. Like that day when I was explaining neural networks to her, I decided, you know.
I'll get off the camera because.
And I drew it, you know, pictorially, and she captured it, so she has it, so she can see it next time. So,
well, that's why I think. That's why I think, though, that when you make it in a way that can be understood by more people, I think more people will grasp it, because you and Jay are both so extremely intelligent. And the way you speak is awesome. It's just a lot like people like me. I'm not saying, I'm sure that Christa and Eric are on a different level than I am, don't completely understand every bit of it. And so I think I probably miss a good percentage of what your message is, only because sometimes I'm still processing what you said before.
But the good news is this is recorded, so you can watch it more than once.
But Monica, that's a really good point. I think that's it's good to sort of take the mystery out of all of this stuff. And the thing is, it's so much information. I mean, you're talking about a paradigm shift. Like you want people to change their entire worldview, which is wonderful. It's just, it's not like a quick fix, you know? So it's like giving people small digestible.
I don't want people to do anything. I just wanted to put down what I found to be the truth, and with my map, and they can do with it what they. But the reality is, the truth is the truth, and it exists irrespective of whether we ignore it or not.
Exactly.
And I think the hope is for people to at least listen to this side, you know, listen to something new. And the great thing is, if you can start, or if we can, you know, at least at the beginning stages, work with physically aligning our physical and energetic and emotional and spiritual bodies, it makes us more receptive to that, you know, information and that new sort of perspective.
I honestly believe when the student is ready, the teacher shows up.
Yeah.
And I think when somebody is definitely ready, then they'll be open to listening to the information. Just like it took me some time to be open to it. I think it's the same with everybody else. And the moment that you force something on anybody is the moment that they resist it.
That's
and
right.
So that's when we don't want to force anything on anyone, because everybody is going to open up and expand in their own time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with that, I think we've had a wonderful discussion, and we could probably go on for a very long time. And he's just a wealth of information, and maybe we'll have him on another show and potentially phone up and read a second book. So I want to thank you, Gerald, for coming on, and thank you, Monica and Erica, for joining us. And we look forward to coming back again for our next podcast, which is going to be different again. So this time it's going to be more on how to handle your busy life.
Yeah, and I want to say namaste, and thank you, women, so much for honoring me by reading.
Thank you.
I know it was not written for the layperson, but it was what was on my heart at the time, and it took 9 years to get up the courage to do that. So thank you.
And the world thanks you for it, and
Yes.
we're really blessed to be able to have the information like at our fingertips. So thank you for coming on the show.
You're welcome.
And Professor Clark, I just wanted to say from my heart that I appreciate everything that you do day in and day out for being a mentor to my husband, and for you all like just opening up so much the world, us, to all this great data and information. And I appreciate who you are more than just your physical being.
Well, I appreciate that, and you know how I feel about you and Jay. You're part of my family, so and Eric and Zechariah. So we're interacting almost every day, so I think it's wonderful. So
Yeah, thank you guys. Love you.
love you guys too.
Love you too.
Thank you guys. Love you.